It's Sunday night. Sunday night. Gonna dance a little, laugh a little. It's Sunday night. Woohoo!
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
Hello. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sab's podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sundays. Welcome, guys. I feel a little bit shorter. I don't know. I think I accidentally moved my camera, but I don't really have time to figure it out. I'm here. This is what matters. Okay. We have interesting stories to talk about tonight. I know some of you guys are like, you say that every time, but today is definitely different because so many things have happened. I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate all of the love. Thank you guys so much for being a Sabby patron. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their name scrolling across the bottom of the screen there, doing the darn thing. Thank you guys so much. And I want to give a huge shout out to new Sabby patrons. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Sonia, Poneth, and Lee 4D. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate your help. Okie doke. For the sake of time, because one of the stories that we have, the Aaron Maté story, his speech at the United Nations, that's going to take up the bulk of the show. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Otherwise, I'd give you guys shout outs and everything, but I also have something else I have to go to as well. So to keep that ball moving, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. So let's go ahead and share that thumbnail so you can see what we are going to discuss today. It has been a busy day, you guys. It's been a busy day. I've been up since 6 a.m. Okay, tonight we are discussing. Oh, I'm so sorry, Marcel. Guys, make sure you are still subscribed because Marcel just said he discovered YouTube unsubscribed me from your channel, Sabby. I have resubbed. Check and make sure you're still subbed, guys. YouTube does this, especially every time I cross over another 1,000 subs. That happens. Like, people will contact me and say that they were unsubbed or whatever. So make sure you check that. Okay, tonight we are discussing Aaron Maté speaks at the United Nations. That is a huge story. I'm not sure if other people have covered this. I mean, obviously Gray Zone has, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into this discussion about the OPCW report and why this is still an issue and why I believe this is the 3rd time that Aaron has spoken at the UN about this particular issue. We're also going to discuss Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald silenced. Yes, we're going to dive into that story as well. It was really great seeing that combo together, to be honest with you. I thought that's like a power combo. We're also going to discuss Generation Z hustle. Not good news for those of you who are Gen Z. I would argue that relates to millennials as well, but we'll get into that. And last but not least, we are going to discuss justice for Irvo or Tino. If you have not heard about that story, you will hear about that tonight. So buckle up, put on your seatbelt. We're going to dive right in. Okay. So the first story that we're going to get into is Gen Zers. You guys are having a tough time. I'm a millennial. I had a tough time too, but it seems to be increasingly worse for Generation Z. Now, this was released recently in Fortune. Gen Zers are now polyworking, some new term that they came up with here, because holding down just one job doesn't pay enough or give them the flexibility they want. So they're talking about, long story short, working more than one job. I had never heard of this as referred to as polyworking before, but they come up with these terms, So let's dive into this a little bit, and then I'm going to show you a video clip that explains why this idea of having a hustle is actually dangerous. So let's go on. I'll make it a little bit big because their fonts are a little tiny. Traditionally, people would find a vocation they enjoyed and steadily climb the ranks, dedicating their career progression to one employer. But as the cost of living has increased, wages stagnated, and people took to working longer, professionals today aren't waiting for their boss to promote them. Instead, they're taking matters into their own hands. After years of job hopping, and more recently, the expulsion of side hustles, workers are splitting their time across numerous employers at once. The phenomenon of working two or more jobs, called polyworking, came about as people seized the opportunity to take on multiple full-time roles while they were working from home. Now, I just want to chime in here for just a second. This was an issue before the pandemic. I want to make that clear. I knew people who were working multiple jobs. I've worked multiple jobs before. So this isn't something that's new, but it appears that it has increased since the pandemic. And the generation that's been hit the hardest by this, according to this article, is Generation Z. Now, I would argue some of us millennials have had to go through this as well, because we had to go through the '08 housing crisis. So some of us also got hit with economic insecurity and a lot of doubt. So we had to work multiple jobs. I told you guys this before. At one point, I was waiting tables and I worked retail at the same time, 6 days a week. So I want to be clear when I say that this is not new, but now that we are in another economic situation with inflation or price gouging, as some people like to refer to it, and on top of that, we still have some remnants of the pandemic as well. Costs are high, rent is still high. People are finding themselves working multiple jobs yet again, and that includes people who are professionals. It's called a side hustle. Without a tiresome commute, getting one job to another is as easy as signing into your computer for your second shift of the day. And it's why, according to new research, a third of workers are holding down 3 or more jobs. I want to reiterate again, this is not new. People have already been working multiple jobs, but it has increased. So who is more likely to juggle jobs? Paycheck surveyed over 1,000 American workers to find out who is most likely to juggle multiple jobs and the impact it's having on its workers. They found that while 40% of workers overall currently have 2 jobs, this number rises to 46% of Gen Z. Now, the fact that 40% of all workers are having to work 2 jobs, not even getting to the Gen Z part yet, that in itself is a big red flag. That's a problem. Let's remember, people aren't working 2 jobs because they want to be rich. These people are working 2 jobs to get by. But 46% of Gen Z. And not only Are the youngest generation of workers the most likely to be holding down two jobs? They are also even more likely to be splitting their time between 3 or more employers. A full 47% hold down 3 or more jobs, according to Paychecks, meaning that 93% of Gen Zers are holding multiple gigs. Let's highlight this. 93% of Gen Zers are holding down multiple gigs. That's way more than half. That's almost 100%. I tried to warn people about this last year. For those who don't know, I'd worked in higher ed for over a decade. I was an academic advisor. The Gen Z generation, they were my students. So I saw this. I saw it coming. I saw it happening. I saw a lot of their frustration. Some of these kids that got full-time jobs right after they graduated from college, they still had to pick up something on the side, another job. And that was more so to pay rent, unless their parents were helping them. That was more so to pay rent and to start paying off their student loans. This is why I stress the need for canceling student loans. Now, I agree with you, Drav. That is extremely dangerous, yes. This type of work, working all these multiple jobs, it can have a wear and tear on your health. So you are going to be more stressed. You may have more health issues. You're obviously not going to get as much sleep, so you're losing sleep, and that also affects your health and your mental health, your well-being. This is not healthy. And despite what some people may tell you, some people like to brag about a hustle culture. Sometimes you'll hear rappers talk about this. Yeah, I had my hustle on, had to get my hustle. I was working 3 jobs. Then I had to bustle. I tried to rap. I can't really. But you'll hear people brag about this. And I want to be very clear to you, this is not something to brag about. Having to work multiple jobs is not a bragging point. I used to tell my students this when I worked at MIT. They would come to school and they would brag about the fact that they had been awake for 3 days straight. And I would tell them that's not something to brag about. And they would say, well, that's just how hard I've been studying and doing my problem sets. Problem sets means homework at MIT, FYI. So they would say that. And I said, that's not a bragging point. Your body will eventually start to break down if you're not getting enough sleep. It is important that you sleep. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. Now, when you're young, you may be able to deal with it a little bit better. But as you get older, it will have a wear and tear on your body. Not to mention, when you're not getting enough sleep, that can affect your brain power. We should not brag about this, and we should not encourage it either. Meanwhile, 33% of millennials are holding down 3 or more jobs, compared to 28% of baby boomers and 23% of Gen X professionals. So again, like I told you, Gen Z and millennials, we're the ones that are having to usually pick up these multiple jobs the most. But even the fact that 28% of baby boomers, like that's my parents, you guys, even the fact that baby boomers are having to work multiple jobs at their age, what does that tell you about the economic situation that people are in? This is one of the problems with capitalism. Some people like to refer to this as people are trying to keep up with the Joneses, but I beg to differ. Most people that I know that have had to work multiple jobs are not trying to keep up with the Joneses. They're just trying to pay their rent. And nowadays, because grocery prices are higher, now you have that to worry about as well. And I don't see those grocery store prices going down anytime this year, based on what I've read. So we have a problem. We have yet again another generation of younger people having to work more jobs, work more hours, and receive less pay than their parents and their grandparents would have had at this point in time. The American empire is crumbling. We just have to be clear about that. The fact that you have people that even have college degrees and they still have to pick up another job, that tells you how much people are struggling. But I want to get back to this point about this hustle culture, because I want you to understand that you should never encourage people to have to hustle. And it is not a bragging point that you have to hustle, because what that says is that you are not paid enough. You're not paid a living wage in this country to just have one job. And one of the things that employers would complain about in reference to Gen Z generation and some of us millennials is that we job hop. Every year, the employers would say, I'd love to hire students from this program. I'd love to hire students from the school. But they come to our company and they stay 1 year and then they quit and they go to another company. But they never stop and ask why that is. And the reason why Gen Z and millennials are more likely to job hop is so that they can get a significant promotion to pay their bills. And what we have seen across, at least across academia, what we have seen is that a lot of these kids, they're getting salaries that are below what they should get if they were their parents' age at this point in time. In other words, wages did not adjust for inflation. These kids are not getting promoted. So in order for them to make more money, they have to leave the company that they're at and go to another company just to get the raise. This is why they're going to be there for like 1 year. And then they say, okay, my rent increase, I have to find another job at another employer. Sometimes, even if it's a lateral move, they still get a significant increase. But let's get into this clip here about why hustle culture is not good for you at all. This is Hustle Culture, the ugly truth.
In today's highly competitive world, hustle culture has become the norm. On paper, hustle culture seems good and all, but in practice, it can be quite dangerous. This video will go over what hustle culture is and my thoughts on whether it is a good thing or not. I hope this video will spark some discussions on hustle culture, so be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on the matter. So what is hustle culture anyway? Hustle culture is all about constantly working. Those who believe in hustle culture try to devote as many hours as possible to working or hustling. Work is meant to be done everywhere, not just the office, since we have the tools to work anywhere we want. Hustle culture is a lifestyle, and it's celebrated by a lot of people, including companies. One of the most famous advocates for hustle culture is Elon Musk. Everyone knows how many hours he puts in working each week, and he believes that people who want to make a difference in the world need to work more. There are way easier places to work, but nobody ever changed the world on 40 hours a week.
This is the guilt. This is the shaming here that I was referring to. This type of statement can make young people feel like if they're not working more than 40 hours a week, then they're not actually being productive. And I think we need to learn to redefine what it means to be productive. Because does it necessarily mean that you are productive if you work 60 hours a week? Can you still be productive if you're working 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week? People in Iceland who are now have the opportunity to work just 4 days a week, they have found that they're actually more productive working 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. So who determines what is considered to be productive or not? It seems like it's usually the CEOs.
The reason why people believe in hustle culture and grind like crazy is because it usually results in climbing the corporate ladder faster or getting the results you want faster in your business. Studies have shown that more working time has a positive correlation with higher corporate position. That sounds good and all, but
sometimes it's all about who you know. How many of you have worked for an employer and you've watched coworkers of yours who worked their butt off, worked overtime, worked off the clock, worked at home, never got promoted, never got those big promotions. But instead, what you did see are the coworkers of yours that did just enough to get by. And they're the ones that get promoted. And they're the ones that may not get a significant raise when it comes time for your annual review, but they're the ones that would get those big promotions. And have you ever sat back and thought to yourself, like, why are they getting promoted when other people in this office are working more hours and putting in the grind? They're doing the daily grind and they're doing more work. Why are they not getting promoted, but the people who do just enough are getting promoted? This is the danger about working hard. Sometimes you can work hard, besides the impact on your health. Sometimes you can work really hard only to find out you're just going to stay exactly where you are. And sometimes a promotion is not necessarily about how hard you work. Sometimes a promotion is about who you know. And let's be real. Sometimes managers play favorites. Sometimes they have their favorite people that they just handpick. They don't have to work really hard. They don't have to go above and beyond. They've already decided who they think would be best in that position, whether they have the experience or not, or whether they've put in a lot of hours.
The study also showed that their mental health and sleep quality got worse. Although following hustle culture might get you the results you want, here's why I think it isn't as good as it seems. First off, hustle culture is not as productive as it seems. In theory, working for lots of hours might seem like it will get you a lot of results, but in reality, things are different. Hustle culture focuses on quantity over quality, and it promotes getting as many things done as possible instead of focusing on the quality of the work. I always believed in working smarter rather than harder, and that focusing on the quality of your work will yield better results than just putting in hours non-stop. There's also this thing called the law of diminishing returns that shows why working more isn't always the answer.
I want to pause here and stress the law of diminishing returns. This is very important. So what it says here is most productive input leads to productive returns. It pays to invest more time and effort. Diminishing returns. Each added input leads to a decreasing rate of output. It's best to stop somewhere within this phase. And then you can see negative returns. Avoid this phase. Not only to do you not get they got a typo there. Not only do you not get a return for your effort, you decrease your overall output. So you want to try to avoid that. And that's very key. The people who overdo it. I've always said that quality is better than quantity.
The law of diminishing returns states that at some point, the benefits gained is less than the amount of energy invested. At some point, working more won't help you get the results you want. Also, as mentioned before, studies have shown that working too much hurts your mental health. So if you keep working with that kind of mental health, the quality of the work you output is going to be terrible. I strongly believe that you are better off working smarter rather than harder. Second, hustle culture hurts your physical health as well.
Yes.
When you spend all that time working, you won't have that much time to exercise. A lack of physical activity can lead to many major health conditions, which will make you unable to continue working. Worst case scenario, working too much can lead to death. If you don't think overworking is that bad, then you should look at Japan. People in Japan work like crazy, and some of them overwork themselves to death. Other people have even killed themselves due to the stress of working too many hours. Working is good, and you need to put in work, but don't overdo it and take care of yourself.
I just want to add here as well, in reference to like your physical health. For those of you that have desk jobs, it's actually not good for you to sit for long, extended periods of time. So they actually have these standing desks now that you can use where you can actually stand up every now and then and do your work. But what you should be doing is getting up and walking away from your desk and going for a walk. That's really what you should do. Long periods of sitting will put a lot of pressure on your back as well as your legs and your neck. So it's not Doctors do not recommend that. At some point, you need to get up and move. And if you find yourself that you have to be glued to your desk for like 7 straight hours, then that is not a healthy working environment. But to that point about exercise, if you're working constantly all the time like that, when are you getting the opportunity to exercise and to take care of yourself?
Third, hustle culture doesn't allow you freedom to think about other things. Hustle culture makes you obsess over work like crazy. When you're grinding like crazy, your only focus is on work. You start to neglect other things like spending time with friends and family, or spending time on your hobbies. Everyone knows that if you enjoy your work, then it isn't really work. But when you spend way too much time on something, then it starts becoming less and less fun.
This is very true. And I'll leave it there, but there's other videos that you can watch as well that explain why hustle culture is actually dangerous. But this is true. Have you guys ever hung out with a friend who was working all the time, who was working multiple jobs, or was what we would call a workaholic, and you guys are hanging out, maybe you haven't seen them for like a couple of weeks, you guys are going to get drinks, and the entire time you're hanging out, they're on their phone answering emails. This is also not healthy. For all of you that have your email on your phone, I recommend that you remove it from your phone. Your work email should not be attached to your personal cell phone. If your boss gets upset, you can tell them you heard it from me. I don't know. Just tell them you heard it from me. Because the reality is, if you have it there, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna look at it. If that notification bell goes off that you received an email, 9 times out of 10, you are going to look at it. So these are just things I think we need to be more conscious of. And I think it's sad that Gen Z and some millennials still are having to deal with this type of work culture. No one in this country should have to work more than one job, whether you have a college degree or not. Sure, author, I can do that. Eric, can you put the link to that video in the chat? There's so many of them on YouTube too, but I felt like that one was more straight to the point. So I decided to use that one. Gonna go to some of the comments. Brad said, I used to work 12 to 14 hours a day for a company. They thanked me by laying me off and outsourcing my labor. Workaholism is poisonous. I agree. Angela says, I work 4 days a week with one of the days off being Wednesday. It's the best schedule I ever had. I'm never overwhelmed and I am way more productive. Scott, more people need to read and understand Thomas Piketty so there can be a constructive discussion about how to fix the problem. I'll have to look into that. What's up, Wary says 33K subs. Seems like the channel gained about 1K in a week or so. Yeah, so apparently so. I don't always keep up with this kind of thing. Like, you know, I'm busy. I'm a busy person. A lot of times I just post and go, but I did notice that apparently I did cross over 33,000 subs. So thank you guys so much for your support. Yeah, that really shot up there. It really did move pretty quick. What's that, John? Hustle culture helps the boss. There you go. There you go. We're going to get into our next story here. I'm not sure if you have heard about this incident that's happened in Virginia. But Irvo Ortino was killed by the police. He was a gentleman that had a mental illness and was suffering from mental illness. He wasn't killed by the police in his neighborhood or just out and about in the street. He was actually killed by the police in the hospital. Now, for the respect of the family members and for my own mental health, I am not going to show the video of the beating because it's really bad, really bad. But I am going to show you a quick summary of it, and then we'll get into the New York Times article, which explains how these events transpired in the first place. Listen to this.
Today, 3 more people charged with second-degree murder in the death of 28-year-old Irvo Otieno in custody. All 3 are employees of the Central State Hospital Mental Health Facility in Virginia, where Otieno was taken on March 6th. That's in addition to 7 sheriff's deputies already charged with second-degree murder.
He was murdered.
Now, let's just pause here. I want to show you the deputies here one more time. Whoop. Here we go.
He's already charged with second-degree.
Right here. So these are the 7 deputies that are charged with the murder of Irvo Otieno. He was at a mental health hospital. This was not just any hospital, a mental health hospital. These officers came in and they beat him like he was a dog. I kid you not. That's why I cannot show it on here. I watched it earlier today and I was like, that's something. Now, I've told you before that when it comes to mental illness, police officers should not be involved with those types of incidents at all. They are not trained to deal with those types of situations, but there are people that are. And the mental health experts, again, is at a mental health hospital. The mental health experts, they are trained to deal with those types of situations. That's what they're there for. Police officers are not. They don't know how to deal with it. They overdo it, and people lose their life as a result. Let's go on.
Murder.
He was murdered. They smothered the breath out of my baby. They murdered my baby.
His family has now seen video of the fatal incident.
At what point do we stop preserving life? At what point do we consider mental illness a crime?
Prosecutors say Otieno died of asphyxiation after being held down for 11 or 12 minutes.
Restrained so brutally with knee on his neck, the weight of 7 individuals on his body.
They put their knee on his neck, they held him down, and they beat him for 11 minutes. Now, we all remember what happened with George Floyd when there was a knee on his neck, right? I believe they said that was around 8 minutes, roughly a little bit over 8 minutes, 11 minutes. All of these officers beat him. It's on camera.
While he's face down, handcuffed with leg irons.
Otieno was arrested on March 3rd after police say they responded to a burglary call next door to his home and took him to the hospital for evaluation, where he became, quote, physically assaultive. His mother says she pleaded with the police.
So they pulled him off treatment, took him to jail, didn't take him down there with any medicine.
Problem number 1, they pulled him off of treatment. So he wasn't taking his medicine, which is probably why he had the outburst that he had.
After a weekend in jail, where prosecutors say video shows Otieno was pepper sprayed, punched, and mistreated, he was brought to the Central State Mental Facility on March 6th, where authorities allege he became combative.
In the videos are never confrontational with them. He is not posing a threat to them
at all. Based on what I saw from the video, at all. He was not a threat to them at all. And they took him down.
He's not violent or aggressive with them.
In court this week, an early glimpse of the deputy's potential defense. One lawyer citing this.
The ongoing issues that they had been having with this individual with regards to his disorderly conduct, with regards to his aggression, with regards to his resistance.
But
so that means he deserved to die? that means he deserved to have, his breathing cut off. Mental illness is not a crime. And mental illness should not be a death sentence either. But sometimes if you get the law enforcement involved, this is what it becomes.
His family says what he needed was help. What do you want to see happen to these deputies, either of you?
Justice. I would like them put away, if you ask me, for life, that they don't see the light of day again. What they did to my son was horrific. Horrific.
And I just want to say, Ben, the lawyer here, Ben, is he the only civil rights lawyer in the country? Because it seems like every time one of these incidents happen, he's the only one there. Like, it seems like he's the only civil rights lawyer there. And how does he have time to go to all these different situations? This is just something I never really understood. All of these, well, the ones that we know about, all of these police brutality incidents that have been televised, he's the lawyer. So I never understood that. I'm just like, no other criminal or civil rights, no other civil rights lawyers?
Light of day again. What they did to my son was horrific. Horrific.
We reached out to the Central State Hospital Mental Health Facility for their response to the charging of 3 of their employees with second-degree murder. We have not yet heard back. We have also reached out to the attorneys identified so far for the 7 deputies charged. The only one of those attorneys that has gotten back to us in detail was the attorney for Deputy Bradley Diss, who says that his client looks forward to being vindicated in court.
Okay. If you do want to see the actual video, Democracy Now! Actually shows parts of that video if you did want to see that, but I'm not going to show that video on here. I am going to get to a little bit of the backstory about what happened here. So it says, new video shows Virginia officers overpowering and punching Irvo Otino in jail cell. The video was recorded several hours before previously released footage, which showed 7 sheriff's deputies pinning Mr. Otino down for more than 11 minutes. So again, that's longer than George Floyd. So it says here, they were physically overpowering him, with one of them appearing to punch down multiple times before the officers carry his limp body out to a transport van. The video was recorded on the afternoon of March 6, several hours before Henrico County Sheriff's deputies brought Mr. Otino, 28, into Central State Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital in Dinwiddie County, roughly 50 miles away. In an admission room there, previously released footage shows a group of 7 sheriff's deputies piling on top of Mr. Otino and pinning him to the floor for more than 11 minutes. He was asphyxiated in the process, according to the local prosecutor. So remember, with George Floyd, it was just a little bit over 8 minutes. This was 11 minutes. So obviously those officers knew that they were going to stop him from breathing. This is not a secret anymore. We know how this works. Both videos were released by the Dinwiddie County prosecutor, Ann Cabell Baskerville, who has charged 10 people, 7 deputies, and 3 hospital employees with second-degree murder in Mr. Otino's death. A grand jury confirmed the charges with indictments on Tuesday. But how did this all transpire? So Mr. Otino was taken into custody on March 3rd by Henrico County police, who were responding to a report of breaking and entering from a neighbor. Mr. Otino had walked to the neighbor's lawn and picked up some light fixtures on the property and was banging on the front door before his mother retrieved him. Again, remember, he has mental illness. Mr. Otino had a long history of struggling with mental illness. His mother, Caroline Uko, told the police at the time that he was in mental distress. Eventually, he was taken to a nearby hospital in an ambulance When they took him to the hospital, I knew he was going to come home. But later that day, on March 3rd, the police took Mr. Ortino from the hospital to the Henrico County Jail, where he was held on charges of assaulting a law enforcement officer, disorderly conduct, and vandalism. He spent the weekend there as his mother tried to find out where he was and get him his medication. On Monday morning, March 6th, a judge ordered Mr. Ortino held without bond. In a new video, which begins inside the jail a little before 2:30 p.m. that Monday, a group of officers can be seen standing outside a jail cell as Mr. Ortino slams his hands up against the window. Mr. Ortino pushes out an item of jail clothing that officers tried to deliver through the food tray slot. A struggle breaks out. At least 5 officers appear to grapple with Mr. Ortino through the slot. After the struggle ends, Mr. Ortino appears to be in distress through the window, covering his face with his hands. An officer opens the door and 6 quickly rush in. If he was inside the jail cell and he was covering his face with his hands, why did they open the door to the jail cell and go in? Though Mr. Ortino is mostly blocked from view at this point, one officer can be seen throwing multiple punches down. So I'm waiting to find out why they needed to open that door. Officers, at times joined by others, appear to crowd over Mr. Ortino on the floor. After 14 minutes, 6 officers step out into the hallway carrying Mr. Ortino's apparently limp body. They beat him to death. Mr. Ortino was pronounced dead less than 3 hours later. And Joe Biden wants to continue to fund the police. What I don't understand is, again, why did they open that door? Hopefully, the family members get some type of justice for him, but there have been too many police brutality incidents that have involved people that are mentally ill. And I don't know how many more incidents we have to see for people to really understand that police officers should not deal with mental illness, period. Terrible, terrible. I'm gonna go to some of the comments here and we'll go to the next story. Samuel says, thank you, Sabby, for not showing the vid. We all know what they would do 200 years ago. There you go. Thank you for the super sticker, Aberdeen71. And Drav says they know what they are doing. They know that this system will protect them. There you go. All right, I'll take that comment on Rockfin and then we will go to our next story. All right, thank you for the comment on Rockfin, Roger. It's either who you know or who you blow, and you're not willing to do either to get another job. Also, Uber is the king of hustle culture. They want to keep prices low to increase availability because if you make more money in a shorter period of time, you're more likely to decrease your hours. This is why you have, I think, drivers. Oh, you have sleeping in your car drivers. People start co-ops, double your wage and half your hours. You go. All right. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me with the algorithm. We are going into our next story. I seem to be doing pretty good with time so far, so I'm proud of myself. This story is going to take most of the time. If you have not heard, so just recently, Aaron Maté actually spoke at the United Nations in reference to the OPCW report. Now, what we are going to do is I'm going to try to summarize this as simply as I can. I'm going to try to do the best that I can here because obviously Aaron can explain this a lot better than I can. But I feel like this is an important story and we need to talk about this because in a way, because of some of the censorship that's involved with this story, it actually connects to the story after this. So we'll get to that in just a second. But the OPCW, so that stands for Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. I'm looking at my notes here. I never do notes for this show, but for this time I had to. For this story, I had to. Okay. So it stands for the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Now, to make a long story short, basically, during the civil war in Syria, there was an OPCW report. The problem with that report was that it omitted key information from some of the inspectors that were involved during the civil war in Syria, particularly in Douma. There was leaked information. One of the things that was leaked was the fact that apparently the symptoms that the citizens of Douma were experiencing did not match typical symptoms of chlorine exposure. The second concern was that the gas attacks were apparently staged. Now that's coming from Professor Postal from MIT. Why is this important? Because it weakens the need for the attacks from the United States government. Now, some people still won't cover this story. Some people still won't report on this. Aaron Maté has already won awards for reporting this story. And you may remember a while back, now this was 2019, the Gray Zone did release this. Leaked OPCW report suggests Syria gas attack was staged. And that was coming from the MIT scientist, Professor Postal, that I just told you about. I want to go back. I think it's very important that we walk through the timeline, especially for those of you who may not be as familiar, right? It has been, 5 years now? It's been 5 years now. So let's go back and let's look at part of this interview that Aaron had with Professor Postal about the information that was leaked about the gas attack being staged. Here we go.
The U.S. has issued a new threat to Syria over what it calls the Syrian military's possible use of chemical weapons in the province of Idlib. But this warning comes as a previous allegation that led to U.S. military strikes on Syria is coming under question. The Syrian government was accused of dropping gas cylinders that killed dozens in the city of Douma in April 2018. But a newly leaked engineering assessment from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons challenges that claim and says there is a higher probability that the cylinders were, quote, manually placed.
So you see this piece right here? Manually placed. In other words, staged. This reminds me of something similar, although not as extreme, but it reminds me of something similar that happened during the George Floyd protests in Fayetteville, North Carolina. The night before the protests, there were bricks. All of a sudden, these bricks that just appeared out of nowhere piled up in front of the stores in downtown Fayetteville. They were not there before. There was no construction being done. And a friend of mine who does local journalism there, she actually had taken pictures of that and had reported on that and was like, where do these bricks come from all of a sudden? Just in time for the protest. It was almost as though they were giving the protesters something to use. Here's these bricks. Why don't you pick one up and throw it? Something like that. That's what this kind of reminded me of, the fact that it was just manually placed there.
This is the first time this judgment has been made public. It was excluded from the OPCW's final report on the Douma incident, which was used to pin the blame on the Syrian government. Theodore Postal is professor of science, technology, and national security policy at MIT, and he joins me now. Welcome, Professor Postal. If you could first talk about just what this leaked document says and what you think the significance of it is.
So Professor Postal, by the way, for those who are not aware, I worked at MIT. So some of these people that come up, I kind of know off the top of my head some of the things that they've done. He also worked for the Pentagon. Like back in like before he worked at MIT, he worked for the Pentagon. And he also criticized the Iron Dome. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but he was one of those people that was heavily attacked because he had criticisms of Israel's Iron Dome. So he was a little bit of a, he was a little rogue.
This document is a highly professional document that was obviously produced by a team of experts. It's written in an extremely careful way. And in fact, it describes something that that with high probability, but I would say if I were advising somebody, as I did when I was in the Pentagon, I advised the Chief of Naval Operations, and part of my job was to take, technically detailed analyses and translate it into information that could be readily understood by an intelligent non-expert. So if I were briefing the chief on this particular document, I would not caveat it quite the way that the professionals did, although they did a good job. I would simply say that the evidence is overwhelming that the gas attacks were staged. And then I would explain why this evidence is overwhelming. And the reason the evidence is overwhelming is they did, first of all, very careful mathematical calculations to determine what the scene should look like if it occurred as it appeared. So, for example, they, using a computer, assumed that a cylinder filled with chlorine was dropped from 500 meters onto this roof.
Okay, now that piece right there is important, the cylinder filled with chlorine, because at the beginning, remember I explained to you, one of the information that was leaked was the fact that when they actually observed the symptoms of the people in Duma, what they found, medical professionals, what they found is that their symptoms were not symptoms of people who had chlorine exposure. So that's just important to remember.
The roofs. And what they found is that the cylinder always went through the roof. So that's a very interesting result. In fact, what they did is, because these are computer experiments, that is to say mathematical calculations that are done where they can change the parameters, they actually mathematically dropped cylinders that had nothing in them, because they could not get a situation where a cylinder hit the surface of this reinforced concrete roof and did not just go right through it. And this is critical because what the calculation indicates is that the cylinder would have had so much momentum that it would have gone through the roof. It would not have been on the roof, just sticking in through this hole that it appeared to be the situation when inspected. They then took their observations. They had experts on the scene, and these are real experts. I want to underscore real experts versus phony experts. I'll have more to say about that shortly. And these real experts observed that the hole in the roof had all the characteristics of a hole created by either an artillery rocket or a mortar shell. And these holes of this kind have certain characteristics that an expert, a true expert, a real expert would understand. So, and they describe those details so that someone like me can understand why their conclusion is that it was an explosive charge that created the hole. That is to say, somebody was firing rockets and mortars. Some of them landed on the roof of this bit. One of them landed on the roof of this building. It produced a hole, and somebody else came along, hauled the cylinder to this location and stuck it through the hole and tried to make it look like there was a scene that was created where the cylinder fell, caused the hole, and then happened to be sticking through the hole.
So what he's basically saying is that the cylinder, based on the physics and based on blah, 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 based on the physics and based on the math, it appears that the cylinder was put there after the fact, that it didn't actually cause the hole. Say whatever you want, but math doesn't lie. Okay? Like math, numbers, like, no, this doesn't lie. So basically, it's like they were saying that the hole was caused by the cylinders when, based on the math and the physics, that couldn't possibly be true. The hole was caused by a rocket, so to speak. And then the cylinders were placed there after the fact to make it look like that is what caused it. Let's go on a little bit more here, and then I want to get to that speech.
Well, it turns out when you do the mathematical calculation, that's not what would occur. The cylinder would just pass through the roof. Now, if you read this report as a person, an experienced person like myself, who is can claim some expertise as a professional, you would find a very interesting sentence early in the report. In the early part of the report, they describe how they collected data. And they describe collecting data by their own observations, by interviewing various people, and by having discussions with what they describe as supposed experts.
Let me read that quote, Professor Postal. The situation was also complicated by the many sources of information and opinion about what was alleged to have occurred, including impressions and views of alleged witnesses, spokespersons, the media, representatives of state parties, as well as the views of supposed experts in subsequent exchanges.
Yes. Now,
notice it says supposed experts.
if I were writing a report, or if any other serious professional were writing a report, and there was legitimate disagreement among real experts, people who you don't dismiss as not knowing what they're doing, you would describe them as experts who have different judgments about this or that, and you would describe what those judgments are, because you want to give people an understanding of what the legitimate possible alternative explanations might be. Instead, these people just talk about supposed experts. That is a signal to any other person who's a real expert that they're saying, we had to deal with a lot of nonsense. And now, if you also include the fact that this is a document that is written within a highly constrained bureaucratic environment, that's another indication that the choice of these words is a serious criticism of the environment they're in. If you were in the Pentagon and you were in an environment where you were allowed to do your work freely, you would never refer to other people who had other input as supposed experts. And I think this is a very telltale statement. Now, on top of this, you have a report that was produced and provided to the UN Security Council. And this report is itself very interesting.
So this is the OPCW report that he's referring to.
The report describes exactly what is described as the methodology used in this paper. They talk, in other words, this is the report to the UN Security Council that's published. And they talk about using computer simulations to understand how the scene was produced. And so they give the same description of how they went about doing the analysis, but they say that the result was the scenes that they looked at and the scenes that they produced through mathematical simulation agreed. So they come to a totally different statement from the statement in this leaked document.
Right. And so I already explained to you guys that math doesn't lie, right? But they lied in that report. So they left that information out, what he was saying about where the cylinders were placed after the fact. And then I want to get to the speech that Aaron had. So Aaron was at the UN recently. if you're signed up for his Substack, you'll see this. I'm not going to read the entire thing. I just want to read this piece right here, and then we'll get to the video. It says, oh, it's so tiny. On Friday, March 24th, I spoke to the United Nations Security Council about the OPCW's ongoing cover-up of its investigation into the alleged April 2018 chemical attack in Douma, Syria. At the center of the scandal are two veteran OPCW scientists who deployed to Syria in April 2018 for the OPCW's Douma probe. The pair have accused senior OPCW officials of manipulating the investigation to reach a conclusion that basely impacted the Syrian government in a chlorine gas attack. Their concerns are backed up by a trove of leaked documents, which I have extensively reported on. So that's a little bit of a intro there. And then now we're going to go to the opening speech at the UN. And again, I want to say this is not the first time that he has spoken to the United Nations about this particular issue. He has done this multiple times. I think this is the third time. So, and nothing has been done. So let's go on.
This is now the third time that I've had the opportunity to
Eric, we will need volume booster for this one, if I remember correctly.
Address members of the Security Council about the controversy surrounding the OPCW's investigation of the alleged chemical attack in Douma. And if I can share one opinion, while I really appreciate this opportunity, I have to say that I find it unfortunate that nearly 5 years after that alleged incident in Douma, this controversy around the OPCW investigation is still being debated in public rather than being addressed by the OPCW. Because fundamentally, this is a controversy that is internal to the OPCW. And at the heart of it are at least two veteran inspectors from the OPCW with nearly 30 years of combined experience who worked on the Douma investigation, who deployed to Syria for the Douma investigation. And what they say is very simple. They have accused senior officials at the OPCW of suppressing findings from their probe and putting out unsupported conclusions that baselessly implicate the Syrian government in a chemical attack. And they are not demanding that their own opinions be affirmed as the ultimate truth. They just want the right to be heard. And rather than hearing these inspectors, allowing them to come in and voice their concerns, allowing the OPCW to weigh the findings that were suppressed, the OPCW has refused to meet with them, and he's even denigrated them in public, which I...
So here's the question I have. If they don't believe that there is a different narrative that they should explore here, why not just meet with the inspectors? You know, like they're not meeting with those inspectors on purpose because they know that there's truth to what they're saying and they don't want to hear it. Then they may have to record it and then they may have to edit that report.
I will get into. So when I talk about the suppression of the Douma probe, it's a long story which I've gone through before, so I won't repeat the whole story. But let me just to illustrate, give you one example of the documented suppression of the findings of the Douma probe, which nobody contests. This is uncontested fact. So the alleged chemical attack happens on April 7th, 2018. Afterwards, OPCW investigators get on the ground. The first time, by the way, that an OPCW fact-finding mission manages to reach the site of an alleged chemical attack in Syria. After they return to The Hague, and now this account that I'm telling you is based on both public documents and also leaked documents that have come out. So after the Douma team gets back to The Hague, they do chemical analysis, and they discover something very strange. The symptoms of the Douma victims, the people seen in the photographs, they look like they've been subjected to a nerve agent attack. There is profuse foaming from the mouth in several victims. And inside the apartment building where dozens of bodies were filmed, the victims are gathered in piles at the center of a room. So these are classic signs of a nerve agent attack like sarin. But the OPCW's chemical analysis that comes from its own labs turns up no traces of any nerve agents whatsoever, including sarin.
In other words, a chlorine attack is most likely probably not going to make you foam at the mouth. Like, I don't know if you guys remember do you guys remember seeing this on the news? I remember seeing these videos and these images at the time that this had happened. Really disturbing images at that point in time, I think. But I think the thing is like, from what Aaron's saying, it's sounding like the people of Duma, they just want it to be corrected. They just want the record to be corrected. They're just asking for some type of accountability here. It doesn't seem like they're even asking for some of the things I think they should be asking for. I think they should be asking for more, but it doesn't seem like, they are, but they need to correct the record.
So the OPCW team has a quandary. You have symptoms of a nerve agent attack, but no evidence of nerve agents in the chemical samples. So they need expertise. So what do? They fly to Germany to consult with top military toxicologists for help. And they show these German toxicologists, 4 of them, photos and videos of the incident in Duma. The Germans very quickly reach an unequivocal conclusion. They conclude that the observed symptoms of the Duma victims have no correlation to chlorine whatsoever. And one member of the Duma team, who is present at this meeting, writes in an email subsequently that was leaked. And this member is not one of the dissenting inspectors that we know about. This member is the head of the OPCW laboratory, who is not one of the dissenting inspectors that are publicly known. And this head of the OPCW laboratory even reports that one of the Germans raised, quote, the possibility of a staged attack, unquote, in Duma, because, quote, the circumstances of death for the victims do not match chlorine. So that is one of the members of the OPCW, not one of the dissenting inspectors, reporting back that one of these German experts who they consulted pointed out that this could be a staged attack on the grounds that the symptoms of the victims do not match chlorine. So the OPCW team puts this into its report. They write up an original report in June 2018, including all their findings, including the assessment of the German toxicologists that the circumstances of the deaths and the symptoms displayed in the victims do not match chlorine exposure.
Okay, so that piece right there is very key. The toxicology report. Have you ever heard, you might hear about this sometimes when there's like the death of a celebrity, like when Michael Jackson died, they talked about this. They talked about this when Prince, or the artist formerly known as, whatever you're calling him these days, when Prince passed away as well. If there's any type of, chemical substance, drugs, etc., the toxicology report should be able to tell you what was in their system. So if those toxicology reports came back with that information, and then you also have the other inspectors that said that this was a staged attack based on the physics and the math, then why haven't they edited that report? Why haven't they changed that report? Who are they covering up for? Who are they trying to protect? These are the questions we all should be asking ourselves.
What happens to that finding? It gets erased. The OPCW, some unknown senior officials at the OPCW, take the original report produced by the Duma team. They erase that finding based on the German toxicologist input, and they add a series of unsupported conclusions suggesting that a chemical attack occurred. And when this is discovered by the dissenting inspector known as Inspector B, his name is Dr. Brendan Whelan, who is the chief author of that original report, he protests this deception. And that doctored version of the report is withdrawn. But the Germans' input that was censored is never, ever disclosed publicly. In the final report of the Duma investigation put out in March 2019, the Germans' input is still missing. Now, that final report put out in March 2019, it does say that after the Germans were consulted in June 2018, the OPCW went back and heard from 5 more toxicologists to get their input. But they don't tell us what these 5 toxicologists said. All they say, based on the input of these additional toxicologists, is that it is not currently possible to precisely link the cause of the signs and symptoms to a specific chemical, unquote. Now, this ambiguous language obscures the fact that the German toxicologists who were initially consulted had unequivocally ruled out the specific chemical of chlorine gas. But this FFM report doesn't mention the German toxicologist assessment, and in fact, it even erases the fact that these German toxicologists were consulted. So there's a detailed timeline of the Duma mission included in that March 2019 report, showing all the steps that the OPCW investigation and Duma took. And oddly, that German mission is excluded. It no longer exists. So the dissenting inspectors have been trying, first internally, to get the OPCW leadership to address this obvious suppression.
Yeah, so this is it was obviously a sham report, and the fact that there hasn't been some type of order or pressure from the UN or whoever needs to push to get this corrected, that's suspect to me. To me, it says they're trying to hide. They're trying to hide that information. I want to fast forward to, let me finish playing this part, and then I have to fast forward to 20 minutes. There's another part.
To get the OPCW to hear their concerns and weigh the evidence that was suppressed. What has the OPCW done in response? They've refused to allow these inspectors to come in. They've refused their calls to meet with all the original members of the Duma team, not just the dissenting inspectors. And when other officials, including OPCW veterans, have tried to raise these issues publicly, they've been blocked.
Yeah. So basically, they're only wanting to listen to the approved voices. Now, I want to fast forward here when he starts to talk about, I think it's at the 20 mark, right about, let's make sure I'm not, this part right here. When he talks about the exposure.
That the incident, quote, is pretty much consistent with a nerve agent type exposure. And as I said earlier, weeks later, when the OPCW consulted these experts in Germany, they went even further and ruled out chlorine exposure.
Yep.
So now we get the IIT's response to all this, their attempt to offer a counter narrative.
So for the other inspectors that provided the other toxicology report where they said they could not determine what the chemical was, that's fine. But at the same time, they could rule out what it was not. And I think that that's the issue that Aaron is mentioning there. Whereas you had the other toxicology report that blatantly said, like, they can rule out, a chlorine here. But then you had the second toxicology report that said, well, we can't really determine what the chemical is. But you can determine what is not. Does that make sense to you guys? So they weren't even trying to do that. Let's go on more here about the exposure.
They claim to have brought in a, quote, independent expert toxicologist who was not involved in previous assessments of the incident, unquote. Well, first of all, this raises an obvious question. Why not consult the toxicologists involved in previous assessments of the incident? After all, the IIT's mandate is based on the findings of the fact-finding mission. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the fact-finding mission heard from German toxicologists that chlorine is not consistent with the symptoms of the Duma victims. The fact-finding mission also heard from 5 new replacement toxicologists, and we don't know what they said because the OPCW never told us, but why not consult with them? And no explanation is given for why we should take the word of this new toxicologist and supposedly independent toxicologist over all the other toxicologists consulted before. That is left unaddressed. This new toxicologist does rule that, in their opinion, the symptoms of the victims are consistent with chlorine gas. But no evidence is presented that could address the key issues raised by the German toxicologist, which is the inconsistency of the symptoms of the Duma victims with chlorine gas, including the profuse foaming at the mouth. There's no effort to address that. In fact, if you read the IIT report, nowhere does the toxicologist say that the profuse foaming at the mouth, which was raised by the German toxicologist as a very key issue, there's no evidence that this new IIT toxicologist has even addressed that. And nowhere does this toxicologist say that those symptoms, specifically profuse foaming at the mouth, are consistent with chlorine gas.
Okay, so that's important as well. They addressed that again with the symptoms that people were experiencing and the chemicals that they were, supposedly exposed to. So that's important for people to know. If you want to see the full video, you can catch that on Gray Zone. It's Aaron Maté at UN OPCW covers up, denies justice to Duma victims. And also, if you're not familiar with this story, I highly recommend that you start with this article, which I featured earlier. This article here, leaked OPCW report suggests Syria gas attack was staged, MIT scientist says. So this article was released May 25th, 2019. So I recommend that you start there, because I don't want you to, if you start with the speech at the UN and you're not familiar with the story, you might be a little bit confused and you might start asking yourself questions like, who are these people that he's referring to, right? But third time at the United Nations. Same story. So they have not made adjustments there. Child of God said it is important to remember that people were murdered to stage this event. There's that too. Lorshek, the report had to be modified to serve its U.S. purpose. Desert Mantis says the big question is who murdered these people? Woman, noun, female, adult, human. I just found you. I'm surprised I haven't seen you earlier through my feed. Just grateful I was able to bring a sort of light to all this dark, corrupt fiasco. Recall government. Welcome and thank you so much. Yeah, there's a lot of us in indie media are suppressed, but I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll get into this story about Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Laura. Thank you so much. Okay, Glenn Greenwald and Russell Brand sat down to have a conversation about censorship, and I want to piggyback off of that story about the OPCW report. It was obvious that some of those inspectors were quote unquote censored, right? They weren't allowed to really talk about it. It was leaked information. People didn't want to hear what they had to say. The report didn't even include their statements. So they were censored. They were silenced, so to speak. Here it is 5 years later. And now we're going on to this story here with Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald talking about just that, being silenced, whether it's independent media, whether it's social media, to be honest with you. And these two go hand in hand here because both of them have had to deal with this one time or another. Now, we all know where Glenn Greenwald's suppression comes from, basically him covering the Edward Snowden story, basically put a watch out there for people like, oh, we need to try to silence him. Russell Brand was everyone's beloved, charming, fun-loving actor and podcaster until he started to call out the billionaire class, until he started to call out the class issue in this country and started to speak about the banks and wealth in a negative way. Then all of a sudden, that was just 2 weeks ago, people were saying that Russell Brand is now right-wing because he was calling out corruption and he was calling out greed. But how do you handle those incidents when you feel like you are being silenced? Let's get into it.
Dissenting voices are being shut down. Centralized power are arresting world leaders. The elites have abandoned us. What are we going to do now? Hello there, you 6 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Turn on the notification bell if you haven't turned it on right now, because they will not send you this kind of content, not without a fight. They won't. Subscribe to our channel right now. We make this content every single day without fail, and I don't want you to miss a second of this stuff. Have you noticed that the authorities are doubling down on centralized control? Have you noticed that dissenting voices are being smeared even in congressional hearings? Have you noticed that the elites seem to be militarizing and preparing for the next phase of social evolution? I had a conversation with the world-class Pulitzer Prize winning conspiracy theorist Glenn Greenwald, who's also on Rumble like me, and I asked him, why is it that the elites are no longer even pandering to ordinary people? Do they think they have this battle won? Do they think that the emergent forces of AI and the militarization of the police force means that they no longer even have to pretend to listen to us? This is a fantastic conversation. Stay to the very end. Let me know in the comments what you think, who you want to see on our show as guests, and what questions you think I missed.
We have been discussing the nature of centralized authority, its growing ubiquity, it's clearly becoming more radical in the enforcement of its edicts and ideals, yet its legitimacy seems shakier than ever. The threatened and presumed arrest of Trump is one way that we can discern this waning of actual legitimate authority, and as it continues to double down. Obviously, the neglect of the comparable Russiagate Steele dossier stuff is an aspect of this we've covered, but as it's happening at the same time as a warrant has been issued for the arrest of Putin, it's difficult not to look at comparable war crimes. We used this piece today about, I think it's from cato.org, talking about how, sort of Biden, Trump, Obama have all been explicitly involved in the UAE bombing of Yemen. And I suppose what I would like your perspective on, Glenn, is the decline of trust in authority and almost the assumption now that there is no central body that has the right to execute that kind of power. And if that is something that's real and legitimate, and if you feel that it's true as well, what does that tell us about where we are and where we have to get to?
Yeah, it's a very interesting paradox, isn't it? That secure, confident institutions of authority can give the people over whom they rule a greater degree of freedom, because they know that those people, by and large, trust those institutions and they're not endangered and threatened as a result. When those institutions fall into pervasive disrepute, when they're held in contempt, as is the case quite validly for most Western political and media institutions, that's precisely when they become even more authoritarian, when they start cracking down further on dissent because they're afraid. And instead of trying to determine what is the root cause of this loss of faith and trust and confidence, when's the last time you heard anyone who works in corporate media? They're very good at lamenting the fact that the public no longer trusts them. They're very good at blaming other people for the fact that the public no longer trusts them. When's the last time you heard any of them in any earnest way engage in self-reflection? What is it that we did to lose the trust and faith of the public? Or when has any government official done that? They watched Donald Trump get elected, clearly an expression, as I heard you saying earlier, of this kind of despair.
Let's stop here for just a second. In reference to what he's saying about mainstream media, that they don't actually sit back and think, what did we do that caused people to go away? What did we do that drove people away? Like CNN, they complain that they're losing ratings. They had a new CEO, right? New managers. We're doing a shift. We're going to move a little bit further to the right, but not really on the right, so people can still think we're liberal. They're trying all these different things, and it doesn't seem to be helping their ratings. They know the ratings are going down. They know that more people are choosing to watch independent media, but it seems like they never sit back and question, what did we do wrong that turned people off? But I can answer that question for them. Lies, lots of them. Not coming back and retracting those lies. What else? Only choosing to air certain types of information, repeating State Department talking points, only having certain approved sources and people on your network so people don't get to hear some of those independent voices that may have a different narrative or a different opinion or a different experience, things like that. Just saying.
Brexit was certainly the same thing. This kind of, we don't care what the consequences are. We believe the status quo is so corrupt and contemptuous of us that whatever you tell us we shouldn't do, we're going to do the opposite. There was definitely a lot of that in terms of how Bolsonaro got elected in Brazil across the democratic world. And so instead of ever asking, why are people losing faith and trust in us, they instead want to demonize the population. They're racist, they're dangerous, they're engaged in terrorism.
Or we're deplorables, or any type of name that they can call us because we don't want to engage with what they're saying or we don't believe their story.
And as a result, we need to crack down more on them. We need to censor the internet more. We need to criminalize dissent more. We need to try and prevent them from choosing their leaders by convicting them and rendering them ineligible. And as a result, it's an inescapable cycle that the more they do that, the less trust and faith there is in those institutions of power. And in turn, the more authoritarian they feel they need to be. And I think that's the cycle that we're currently in. And it can actually be very cleansing. I think it's.
Yeah, and I want to add here too, as well. It reminds me of what Matt Taibbi said recently. Matt Taibbi was here a couple days ago, and one of the things that he mentioned in reference to the censorship and who to suppress, he was talking about in reference to the Twitter files, and he said that it's like these government agencies, they really don't believe that we can think for ourselves. Like, this is what he was saying. They don't believe that we can think for ourselves. They believe that we have to be told what to believe so that anything that they think is a threat to the narrative that they want us to hear, they're going to try to find a way to suppress it or censor it. Isn't that crazy?
Good that people finally are seeing that Western institutions of authority merit their contempt and not respect, but it can also create a lot of instability and dangerous outcomes as well, because demagogues and others can cleverly exploit that for nefarious ends. But ultimately, they have no one but themselves to blame. And I think you're right. Their solution, instead of trying to fix it, is to just use force to crack down on those who want to challenge them.
While there has been no public mea culpa from any of those organizations, as you listed, whether they are media or political, and certainly, obviously, not corporate, I find it impossible to consider that they haven't privately taken place, that they haven't got within their circles, amongst their elders, amongst their highest intellects, people that are considering, oh no, the reason we've lost authority is because we've become corrupted, because the relationship between the corporate world and the state and the media has become too porous, and people are now realizing it because it's so easy for counter narratives to emerge, whether through credible and established journalists like yourself or new emergent voices or members of the public. They must understand that. They're making the decision to double down on authoritarianism and censorship and smearing opponents and dissenting voices. So, Glenn, why is it that that choice has been made? And what does that tell us about the likely trajectory over the coming years? I mean, in particular, with regard to the likelihood of more pandemics, more legitimization of authoritarianism. Because if you consider that they must have access to the kind of reflection and contemplation that has just been shared by you, they must know that. They must, surely, on some level, and they've elected not to explore it or express it, then there must be an alternative route. I know I'm making so many assumptions there, but that's what I do for a job. So what do you think about that, and what do you think it means about where we're going if they haven't got that reflection or they're not willing to express it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I do fully agree with that assumption, namely that these elites, because they're so smart, and I'm sure a lot of them are quite smart, because they have this kind of sophisticated understanding of the world, it must mean that they realize they bear some of the culpability for what has happened. I think oftentimes to the contrary, especially when you have kind of an insular elite, an increasingly insular elite that is more and more removed from the rest of the society, you know, kind of the Versailles dynamic where you just kind of haul yourself up in a royal court and think that the anger outside of the gates is just whiny, petulant, unjustified resentment and not grounded in legitimate grievances. A lot of elite classes throughout history have thought that about the populations over whom they were so abusively ruling. It's not so much an intellectual failing, it's a psychological failing. It's an inability to accept blame. And oftentimes, the smarter someone is, the more kind of awarded they are with position and privilege and prestige and award, the more convinced they become of their own infallibility. And the more they genuinely believe that anybody angry with them or dissatisfied with them must, by definition, be somebody whose thinking is misguided or who has poor character and who therefore needs to be controlled, who therefore.
That's the thing that I was saying before. It's this need for them to control the masses. And how do they do that? Or what is the best way of doing that? Through mainstream media, right? So the media has that ability to control the masses because they control the narrative. That's why, like now, if you notice, if you go to YouTube, now you see mainstream media on YouTube all the time. CNN's on YouTube. They have a CNN channel. Then there's like this CNN dash, whatever. There's another one, another CNN channel on YouTube. You see ABC on YouTube. All of these mainstream media networks are also on YouTube. And since YouTube changed their algorithm a couple of years ago, those are the media outlets that are on the corporate algorithm. Now, there's some that are, well, I guess TYT is no longer independent media, but TYT, for example, is on the corporate algorithm. So if you are on that corporate algorithm, it is more likely that people are going to see you. Now, why did they change that algorithm? Because they don't want people to really hear, especially with left independent media, they don't really want people to hear what we're saying over here. Not the masses. We are in a controlled space, so to speak, right? But you won't see us on like cable. You won't see us on cable. The things that we are saying, if I tell people, all these wealthy people, they're the problem. They're the problem. You guys should go on strike. We need a class war. Not a class war. We need a class movement across this country. You think they would let me be on cable news? Absolutely not. They'd be like, yeah, you got to go.
Needs to be constrained and limited in what it is they can do, is almost though it's proof. If you don't think Dr. Fauci is an eminent scientist with great integrity, by definition, you're someone who can't be trusted with free speech. You're someone who can't even be trusted to vote for who you want, because the mere fact that you distrust these people, the highest and most renowned and well-regarded elites, is proof that you are broken, that you are somebody who needs leadership and guidance and control and have your liberty deprived of you. And I think the ability to engage in self-critique is something that is contrary to our instinct. It's something we have to work to get ourselves to do. And people who are just constantly having their goodness and their wisdom reinforced have no incentive to do that. I mean, Russell, to me, I know like each year that goes by, we all get older, like there's more and more people who haven't lived through it. But the 2003 invasion of Iraq, I think, was even more of an eye-opening moment than the 2008 financial crisis, although they came one after the other and they're probably interconnected and inextricable. But the fact that so many well-intentioned people assumed that when people like Colin Powell and Tony Blair and, the New York Times and all the journalists who you're told to trust from both sides of the aisle are all in unison telling you the same thing, and it all turns out to be a lie. And
by the way, when they told us that we were in Iraq because there were weapons of mass destruction, turns out there were no weapons of mass destruction. But after that, like all of the lies that were told surrounding that particular war, where was the accountability after the fact? Where was the accountability? There seemed to be none. I mean, a lot of these, news pundits kept their jobs after that. And then you had people like talk show hosts like Phil Donahue who lost his job because he spoke out against it. So it turned out that Phil Donahue was correct. It turns out that the Dixie Chicks were correct. And the majority of Americans, including those mainstream media pundits, were incorrect. But there seemed to be no accountability after the fact. That's the thing. There's no punishment here for the lies. Like none.
Huge numbers of people are murdered because of it. They lose their lives because of it. The region is destabilized. ISIS arises. Like some of the worst possible outcomes imaginable because of the elites and the most well-regarded mistakes. And then you watch those very same people who to this day aren't just in the same positions of power, but greater positions of power. They suffered no consequences at all.
That's exactly my point. That is exactly my point. They were not held accountable at all. And some of those people got promoted after telling lies. It makes no sense to me.
Same with the 2008 financial crisis. Then, of course, you're going to create this breach where you have the elites over here and the masses over here who both distrust and hate them. And the more distrust and hate there is for the elites from the masses, the more the elites believe the masses can't be trusted to make their own choices. And I think that's the tension that's happening.
Well, then I agree. Glenn, if that is indeed the case, then what we have is in fact a new aristocracy, a new oligarchy. We have unattainable, unaccountable elites that are not interested in the voices of those they claim to represent. It sounds to me that you're describing, in a sense, the precondition for revolution, or a type of tyranny and authoritarianism such as the world has never before seen because it's never had the utility that it.
Such as what you see right now happening in France. The people in France, they said, liberation! And they have set themselves free. They have pushed back on Macron.
Currently has. So some of our most dystopic conjecture is legitimized by that trajectory. When you can observe individuals within that system advancing on the basis of deception, once that fissure that you described in 03 and 08 had become more entrenched, it's almost like it becomes literal farce. They can't double back and check now. Too late now. Just keep burying the bodies. Just keep putting the paving slabs over the cadavers. It just pave away the truth. Now, if this is the case, then it seems there's little value in dissecting and discerning between the minutiae that distinguishes the two parties. In fact, what's required is a galvanization of a kind of a new populist force. Is it, Glenn, or am I doing that speculative thing again?
No. I mean, I think that's the only project worth pursuing. I mean, that's what I regard my project as being when I wake up every day in terms of my work, is exactly that sort of unifying of people who are being told constantly that they're supposed to hate one another across ideological and cultural and religious and demographic divides, that instead unifying in that way, that even though you have a bunch of differences on these issues and these inflammatory issues, and you call yourself a leftist or a rightist or whatever, and you belong to this party or that party or some other party, the reality is you have so much more in common than you do differences. Namely, your lives are being controlled and exploited and abused by this very small segment of elite culture. And the only thing that matters is overthrowing their hegemony. And then once a fair system is imposed, you can start kind of grappling with those differences. Until then, you don't have any outlet for doing that. You don't even have the freedom to debate. You don't have the right even to speak. And I mean, that's literally true. And, I remember reading a lot when I was younger about.
I got to stop there. Sorry, that's my timestamp. If you want to see the rest of this interview, the full interview, I want to be clear because I don't want people to get confused. The full interview is most likely on Rumble. That's usually how Russell Brand does it. Because he's one of those Rumble exclusive shows. The same thing with Glenn Greenwald. He's one of those Rumble exclusive shows. So most likely there's a longer version of this interview on Rumble. I haven't been on Rumble in the past 2 days, so I have to go back on there and check. But if you want to see the rest of this one, it is on YouTube and it's called They Are Trying to Silence Dissent. Glenn Greenwald interview. And that is on Russell Brand's channel there. So definitely check out the full piece there. Guys, I know I'm not done with the ballot initiatives yet. I know I have to finish Missouri. I thought I was going to have time to do it tonight, but I'm already later than I should be for an appointment. So I do have to get going. But I hope that you did learn something here tonight because I tried to educate you guys in any way, shape, or form that I can. Again, if you want more information about the OPCW story that we talked about tonight, definitely like check out the Gray Zone for that, because they do have more detailed information. But I sincerely hope I hope I covered it in a way that you were able to understand what it was about. Okay. So that's my key there. I did have to write down notes about that one because it's been a while. Like I said, it's been like 5 years. And I did want to make sure that I had my talking points written down because I didn't want to stumble over things in reference to that, because it will confuse you if you don't understand what's going on. So that's that. That's a wrap. Roger, I have to get you back to not tomorrow, but Tuesday, because I am pressed for time. So Roger, I have to get you back Tuesday. I see them over there. I see them in the rear view, but I got to say bye. And I got to say, now it is time to say goodbye to all my company. MIC, see you real soon. KEY, why? Because we love you. MOUSE. Have a good night, guys. Keep up the fight. Have a good night.